Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Alberta government announced changes when it comes to household gatherings, and just in time for the Christmas holidays. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas blasted the Trudeau Liberals as she says millions of dollars worth of COVID relief payments made their way to fraudsters. And Lethbridge Police announced their new deputy police chief. We have the details.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Until today, Alberta was the only province in the country to not allow indoor social gatherings of unvaccinated people. With the Christmas holidays just around the corner, Alberta's Premier announced a change to that restriction.
We are making two adjustments. First, effective immediately, we are removing the 2 household cohort maximum. This means that you can get together with up to 10 adults from more than 2 different households. Children and youth 17 and younger will not count towards that 10-person limit. Second, this gathering limit now applies to all Albertans regardless of their vaccination status, meaning that both vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals may have small indoor gatherings in homes.
Premier Kenney made the announcement following a late-night meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Canada's other premiers in an effort to stay ahead of the Omicron virus. Now, according to Kenney, Alberta continues to have some of the toughest social gathering restrictions in the country. The province is also expanding rapid testing. Now, beginning Friday, 500,000 free rapid test kits will be available for asymptomatic Albertans on a first-come, first-served basis.
Now, to ensure as many Albertans have access to the limited supply of testing kits as possible, there will be limits on how many test kits you can take. You can pick up 1 box of 5 tests every 2 weeks. That is in any 14-day period. You can also pick up a second one for someone who isn't able to go themselves, provided you have their healthcare number. The recommended usage is 2 tests a week, 72 hours apart. And the greatest benefit is for those who know that they are close contacts of a case. So if you receive a positive result from a rapid test, you must isolate. And you should promptly complete the online assessment and book a PCR test with AHS to confirm the result.
Minister Copping adds that these tests cannot be used for travel or to visit restriction-exemption establishments. More information is available on the Government of Alberta's website. Now, beginning today, all healthcare workers and anyone 50 years of age and older can book their 3rd COVID-19 vaccine booster if it's been 6 months since their 2nd shot. To book a booster, you can call HealthLink at 811 or a participating pharmacy. There's a group of healthcare workers laid off for not receiving the COVID-19 vaccine who are taking their unhappy message to the UCP in Edmonton. The group with the Alberta Boot Project is asking those who lost their jobs with the AHS to take a pair of shoes or boots they used while on the job, along with a note saying what their position was and how long they worked as a healthcare provider, and drop them off at a location in their community. Now, those boots and shoes will then be taken to Edmonton. Kate King is a paramedic who lost her job and is one of the organizers of this initiative. She joins us now from Edmonton. So, Kate, you're hoping that this will deliver a very powerful message to the Kenney government as you drop off this footwear at the Alberta Legislature?
We're trying to bring some humanity to the faceless, unvaccinated rebels. What we're doing is we're personally getting pairs of boots and shoes from people who have been forced into unpaid leave of absence for refusing to cave to medical coercion. And they're putting as much of their story as they can on there. They're writing their job title and how many years they've served AHS to kind of show the Kenney government the loss that firing all of these good, hard workers is going to be to our province.
So how many boots and shoes are you hoping to collect, and which cities are participating in the Alberta Boot Project?
So it's a very new project. We're just getting it underway right now, but currently we have drop-off points in Medicine Hat, Lethbridge, Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, Calgary, High River, Red Deer, Edmonton, and St. Albert. And other people are setting up little drop-off points in their own communities as well and working together to get boots down to Edmonton, the central location.
So, Kate, will you and your group be putting the shoes along with the notes right on the steps of the Alberta Legislature?
That's the plan right now. Yeah, that's the plan. I realize the legislature is under construction right now, so we're also looking at other venues, and we're actually investigating the option of, after we've done our one main presentation centrally in Edmonton, making it a mobile display and actually bringing it around to several different cities and towns in Alberta so that people can walk through and see these booths and the people who were losing.
That was Kate King, laid-off paramedic and one of the organizers of the Alberta Boot Project, joining us from Edmonton. By the way, more information on the Alberta Boot Project can be found on their Facebook page. As you've heard on Bridge City News, the UCP will be holding a leadership review coming up in the spring. We asked our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson if he thinks Premier Jason Kenney will survive.
You raise a great question about this leadership review comes along. Is Jason Kenney going to lose, of course, is the first question. And I think that's an open question, frankly. He has a lot of the support of people with sort of the ground game and the tactical acumen to survive a leadership review. The attempts at the UCP AGM from people who don't like him to cause problems for him, they really failed. So I think he has a good chance of surviving if he wants to.
Tyler Dawson will also discuss if Brian Jean, who recently won the UCP nomination of Fort McMurray, will be a threat to Kenney's leadership. That Q&A is coming up later in our newscast. Federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole was on the offensive once again, saying the government's fall economic statement shows the Trudeau Liberals have simply no plan for an economic recovery.
After having spent $500 billion, the Liberal government is celebrating a massive $144 billion deficit and only a modest recovery from an economy that had literally stopped a year ago. Instead of addressing the inflation crisis, instead of dealing with the cost of living crisis impacting millions of Canadians, Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal government will continue to make life more expensive for Canadian families and seniors. This is why inflation matters. This is why monetary policy matters. This is why job creation, our competitiveness, trade with the United States, our economic future matters. Mr. Prime Minister, budgets don't balance themselves.
Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas also went on the offensive, calling out the Liberals for failing to address organized crime groups that were illegitimately accessing COVID-19 benefits, with an investigative audit not taking place until the year 2023. MP Thomas says the Auditor General needs to hold the Liberals to account.
A red flag should have gone up for someone, I would hope, within the CRA to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't be rolling out extra money here, or hey, that's actually an organized crime group, or hey, that's an individual who's actually a criminal. Maybe we shouldn't be sending them money. But none of that happened. Somehow, hundreds of millions of dollars went out the door without so much as a second glance from the CRA. So almost no accountability with regard to the spending that rolled out in the form of COVID benefits.
Well, it was a cold one in many parts of southwestern Alberta today. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a quick peek at the weather forecast. Jeanette, how long will the cold temperatures be sticking around?
Well, it looks like they're here to stay, at least for now, Hal. And it also looks like we can kiss those plus temperatures goodbye as we are in the negatives, even going into the negative double digits. Keeping in mind that the average low for this time of year is -12. We're going to be hitting those -12s, even -14 next week. And look at those overnight lows, -26. I'm going to have more details coming up later on in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Lethbridge Police Service announced a new hire today. Gerald Grobmeyer has been appointed as the new deputy chief with the LPS. Grobmeyer began his career in 1993 and more recently served as the superintendent in charge of the Red Deer Detachment of the RCMP. Chief Shaheen Medizadeh says Grobmeyer should be a solid addition to the Lethbridge Police Service.
I've worked with Gerald in the past, and I know that his extensive experience, ability to lead, change, dedication to building relationships, and the vision he brings to policing will make him a good fit to join our team. The fact that he's coming from a similar size community, Red Deer, with many of the same challenges and issues that Lethbridge is facing, I truly believe he can really add value to operations of this team.
Grobmeyer will be starting his new position in March. Now, in the meantime, Interim Deputy Chief Scott Boyd from the Calgary Police Service will remain in the role. A Raymond couple and their kids are without a home after a fire ripped through their property, burning it to the ground. Video journalist Angela Stewart spoke with a couple about what happened.
Being delivered to us, so I thought I'd quickly run it over to their house, and in the 3 to 5 minutes I was in their house, I dropped off the box and came back, and opened our door to a house full of smoke.
That was when Baker rushed to the basement to try and find where the smoke was coming from.
Then I got to the top of the stairs for our lower level, and there was just so much smoke that I couldn't get down to find where it was. So
Baker says she attempted to try and save some of their animals, but was unsuccessful.
We lost our 7-year-old miniature dachshund, and we feared we had lost 3 of the cats, but we went back last night, and thankfully 2 of them, one of them being this one. And during the fire, while we were there, one managed to escape.
After the fire, a GoFundMe page organized by family friend Thea McKee was posted online, where over $9,000 so far has been raised. McKee says people have been generous enough to donate food, money, and even Christmas presents.
As for donations of clothes and stuff, I mean, we have so many donations coming in. I have a lady bringing 2 carfuls of clothes and toys and shoes and stuff for the kids. We've had people bring clothes for CJ and for Amy.
As for the Bakers, they aren't sure when they'll have a home to go back to, but they say that they're very thankful for all the donations and support that they've received so far.
We're just so overwhelmed. I mean, it's not just this fundraiser, it's the generosity of the community around us.
During the fire, that the lady up the road that we've met once came down with cinnamon buns and sandwiches to
kind of keep us going.
For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
Countless hours spent in the kitchen and training future generations of chefs has led to a significant award for one Lethbridge College chef. Doug Overis, chair of the college's School of Culinary Arts, has earned the Canadian Culinary Federation's Lifetime Achievement Award. It is an honor given to chefs who have a long history of mentoring young people. Overis said he was speechless when he heard about the honor.
My initial response was, okay, who did this? And I actually pressured our national president to find out who actually nominated me for this. And it turned out it was a good friend of mine. He's the chef at Summerhill Winery in Kelowna. And so I called him up immediately and I texted him, what the heck? And he giggled and he says, you're well deserving of it, chef. And I call him a friend and he says, yeah, there was no question as to who should get this award. So pretty happy, pretty proud.
Now, throughout his career, Overis has worked in a Michelin-rated restaurant in Holland. He also won gold medals at many competitions and Culinary Olympics as part of Team Alberta and Team Canada. Seniors in our community are set to receive some much-needed musical relief. The Concerts in Care, put on by the Alberta Art Society of Alberta, is asking for people to donate money to buy a concert for a care home or retirement living home here in the city. The concert is 45 minutes in length, and you can choose from a variety of musical genres, including jazz, classical, opera, and folk. Now, the program was started as a way to help out our seniors who are not able to attend live performances. There's also a real need for funding for concerts here in Lethbridge.
There's a real demand, but as healthcare facility budgets are so stretched, especially after the COVID pandemic, while facilities really want to bring this type of music to their residents, they don't always have the funds to do so. We have a fabulous board member in Lethbridge, Dr. Jeffrey Steed, who's really out there trying to make sure that Lethbridge residents get access to high quality arts as well. But we would love it if members of the Lethbridge community stepped up to send some professional music to elders in care in Lethbridge.
The Health Arts Society of Alberta provides over 300 concerts a year for seniors in care or retirement homes. A beloved family movie that has been turned into a musical is now in Lethbridge. Students from a local high school will be performing Shrek the Musical in its entirety in January. As Micah Quinn explains now, close to 100 students are taking part in this big musical production.
You'll be able to see all of your favorites like Shrek, Fiona, Donkey, and Lord Farquaad during Shrek the Musical. The musical is being put on by students from the Winston Churchill High School in Lethbridge.
So Churchill hasn't done a musical in a really long time, and I thought, we're coming back from COVID, we might as well go big or go home, so we picked this musical because there was something everyone could play. It's really great for younger audiences, so we have really full student matinees that are happening, and we just wanted to pick something that we could share wide and far with our community here in Lethbridge.
Connor Shaw and Isaac Steckley play the characters of Lord Farquaad and Shrek. The students say that the musicality of the show really adds to the story of Shrek, but still stays close enough to the original.
The message is still just the same. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Don't judge a book by its cover. Like, that's all encapsulated.
It's an expansion on the original concept, and it's a very good one at that. As goofy of a kids movie as the original is, it has a nice message, and it's an interesting expansion on the concept itself.
Johanna Zieber and Hayden Forsyth round out the top characters, playing Fiona and Donkey.
I've never done any musicals or plays before, but it's really fun. She's a really fun character to play, yeah, and I like the songs that just fit her.
Being able to do something is way better than being able to do nothing. Last year I was so bored. It was really boring last year. But it's nice to be able to get back into things and being able to, be able to do this. It's a lot of fun.
For more information on Shrek the Musical, or to purchase tickets, you can visit the Winston Churchill High School website. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Now, students from Dr. Robert Plaxton Elementary School went out on Wednesday morning to spread some much-needed Christmas cheer. The students made their way to St. Therese Villa Assisted Living Facility and spent some time caroling for seniors inside.
So we know that some members of our community can't maybe leave the facilities for various reasons, or maybe not have families that can visit because they may be from out of town. So we reached out to the facility and they jumped on it right away. They said they had members of their community that don't get a lot of visitors. And we thought, well, that's exactly who we want to come see, because they might not get a lot of people to talk to. And anybody else, of course, that's here that wants to share in the Christmas spirit. So we were excited to come bring a little bit of something different this school year. And who knows, maybe it's something that we can continue doing once or twice a year with this community and build that connection.
So yeah, we spent lots of time in the classroom practicing our carols just every day before we dismissed them, getting that fine arts into the class every day. And then we came out here and decided to share the Christmas spirit and just start to build that connection with this community that we hope to keep for a long time.
Over 100 students sang for our seniors during the event. Wonderful to see. Nurses in Saskatchewan are questioning the province's plan to dig the healthcare system out of a surgical backlog affecting 35,000 patients. Last week, the Saskatchewan government announced a plan to reduce the surgical backlog by 2025 and achieve a 3-month wait list by the year 2030. The Ministry of Health says it will do so by expanding operating hours, performing more procedures at regional surgical sites, and tapping into more private surgical clinics. The Saskatchewan Union of Nurses says, however, there are not enough nurses and healthcare staff to support both public and private surgical clinics. New figures show that Ottawa's childcare funding plan will create up to 5,750 new Manitoba jobs in early childhood education. The new data is part of the Trudeau government's $30 billion pledge to lower childcare costs to an average amount of $10 per day by the year 2025. Previously, the agreement announced for Manitoba would create an estimated 23,000 childcare spaces, but did not disclose the anticipated number of new staff. Manitoba has also pledged to boost the hourly wage of childcare workers to $25, but it remains unclear when that would be implemented. As so many regions in the United States recover from recent devastating tornadoes, hundreds of people gathered for a candlelit vigil in tornado-damaged Kentucky.
We ask that you comfort those that mourn, and that you give us beauty for ashes.
In tears right now, those that are near their loved ones. Take this.
It's good to see the people that made it. We've been together. I've seen them all. You know? I've seen a bunch come, I've seen a bunch go, and it's like a family.
That we have been given, the hope that we have in Christ.
All of us coming together, and just the ones of us that weren't there, or even the ones that were, just coming together and being together. It's awesome.
So sad to see. More than 30 tornadoes tore through Kentucky and 4 other states, killing at least 88 people and demolishing hundreds of homes. Well, in southwestern Alberta, felt a lot like winter today, and if you like some of the white stuff, more snow is on the way. Complete weather details are on deck. Well, it was another cold day in Lethbridge, and you know what? More of the white stuff is on the way as well. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the long-range weather forecast. Jeanette, the colder temperatures will be sticking with us for some time, and there's a good chance of more snow as well?
Yeah, that's right. We could see flurry activity beginning as soon as tomorrow. A little bit of a reprieve there on Friday. And then flurries again Saturday evening, and that's going to last right up until Monday night. So more snow definitely in the forecast. -5 as the high tomorrow, -12 on Friday, -1 Saturday, and then back down to -10 on Sunday. A chilly -14 is in the forecast for next Monday and -11 on Tuesday. Now keep in mind as we look at those minus double digits, we're actually lower than the average low on some of those days. For this time of year. Average high, 0. Average low for this time of year, -12. So we're going to definitely be hitting that, particularly overnight as we're seeing the -26s. High temperature on this day back in 1962 was 16 degrees, and we were at -33 in 1964. 8:22 is when the sun rose this morning, and our sun set this afternoon at 4:31 p.m. So taking a look to the national forecast for tomorrow, Victoria seeing a high of 6 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud. 4 degrees in Vancouver, looking at a 40% chance of showers. 2 centimeters of snow expected tomorrow in Edmonton with a high -18. -11 the high tomorrow in Calgary with periods of snow in the afternoon. Also seeing wind gusts 30 to 60 kilometers per hour tomorrow in Calgary. Saskatchewan, beautiful sunny skies, but the temperature not so much. We're looking at wind chill factors of close to -40 in the morning, -30 in the afternoon. Same thing for Regina with a high of -18, -15 the high in Winnipeg with periods of snow, also seeing some wind gusts there as well. Toronto, 40% chance of showers and a special weather statement in effect there for gusty winds, 70 to 80 kilometers per hour. 40% chance of showers also in Ottawa tomorrow with a high of 13, high of 12 in Montreal with showers expected there as well. Mix of flurries and showers in Fredericton tomorrow, high 4 degrees, 6 degrees the high in Halifax, and 2 in Charlottetown. Both of those cities also seeing the periods of snow with the rain. -7 in St. John's, Newfoundland with a mix of sun and cloud. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
The annual pace of inflation held steady last month at 4.7%. Stats Canada says a key driver in the November inflation rate was a 43.6% increase in the price of gas. Food prices, meanwhile, jumped 4.7%, which is the largest increase since January of 2015. CIBC Chief Economist Stephen Tapp says high inflation isn't just hitting consumers hard. He says it is also driving up costs for businesses as the economy struggles with labor shortages, supply chain disruptions, and renewed uncertainty due to the latest rise in COVID-19 cases. Stats Canada says manufacturing sales rose 4.3% in October to $61.2 billion. That follows a 2.8% decline in September. The agency says sales in October were helped by gains in the auto sector and primary metal industry. Motor vehicle sales were up 61% from the previous month, while sales in the primary metal industry were up 4%. That was partially offset by an 8.3% drop in sales of aerospace products and parts. The Canadian Real Estate Association says home sales in November were down 0.7% from the same month last year. But the actual national average home price still jumped 25% to $790,600. Compared to the previous month, CREA says seasonally adjusted home sales were up 0.6% after posting a 9% increase in October. The increase came as sales were up month over month in about 3/4 of all local markets and in all major cities. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 120 points on the day to finish at 20,769. The Dow was up 383 points to 35,927. The S&P 500 was up 75 points to 4710, and the Nasdaq was up 327 points to 15,566. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 84 cents to 71.57 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 8 cents to 3.83 US. Gold was up a cent to 1776.92 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 22.07 US an ounce. Wheat is at $12.76 per bushel, barley's at $9.69, canola's at $22.42, and corn is at $10.66 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.78 to $135, feeder cattle were down $1.15 to $163.43, and lean hogs were down 75 cents to 79.33. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 77.92 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the province announced today that it is expanding rapid testing. Beginning Friday, 500,000 free rapid test kits will be available for asymptomatic Albertans on a first-come, first-served basis. Health Minister Jason Copping says these tests cannot be used for travel or to visit restriction-exemption establishments. You know, there were a lot of big stories that came out of the Alberta legislature this year. Coming up, a year in review of some of the biggest stories with our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney had a big announcement today discussing some of the criticisms his province has received in regards to his government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. To talk about this in more detail is the Alberta correspondent with the National Post and our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson joining us from Edmonton. Tyler, let's talk about the big media avail that Premier Kenney had earlier today.
Yeah, so this was supposed to be a media availability on Tuesday evening, and there was supposed to be an update then on some rapid test stuff, some booster stuff, and some loosening of restrictions for Christmas. And that, of course, didn't happen. Instead, the Premier was on a call with the other premiers in the country and the Prime Minister to discuss the Omicron variant and what was going to happen. So that briefing sort of got moved to Wednesday morning, which felt very strange, I have to say, that we weren't all clustering at 3:30 in the afternoon. But the gist of the announcement is basically this. There's going to be rapid tests available at a number of pharmacies and Alberta Health Services sites around the province. Each person will be able to get, I believe it is 5 tests, and these will be used, sort of over the holiday season or whatever to help keep safe if you're having a Christmas gathering. There was also an announcement on the expansion of boosters. So it's now everyone over the age of 50 years old, plus all healthcare workers are now eligible for a booster shot. And the last bit of the announcement, there's some other school stuff in there in terms of rapid testing deployed for schools that have 2 active cases. But the other big thing really was some very slight reductions, I would say, on the gathering restrictions. So as of yesterday, as of Tuesday, it was, of course, the vaccinated could gather with 10 people from no more than 2 households, and the unvaccinated could not have social gatherings. So those have been relaxed a little bit. The new rules are you can have up to 10 adults gathered, and kids like up to 17 aren't counted. And those can come from any number of households. So it's not as limited. The Premier says that this is still the most stringent rules in the country. The question is going to be whether or not that remains the case over the next sort of 24 hours, depending, because other provinces that have like 25 people are allowed to gather, presumably are going to be bringing in new restrictions shortly. But, this feels like the first sort of major COVID announcement we've had in quite some time. And very much a reminder that this thing is still with us.
And it's at the same time, it's also good news, some of the loosening of the restrictions as we head into the Christmas break, as families gather once again. So that is some good news here. Now, Tyler, there were some big stories that came out of the legislature. Let's do kind of a year in review here. And one of the first big news stories of 2021, not to mention the pandemic, was Aloha Gate. Now, there were, 5 MLAs and 1 cabinet minister who traveled abroad, plus some 9 staff. Now, this obviously infuriated a lot of Albertans who at the time hadn't left their houses for many months.
Yeah, this was, a huge controversy at the time, and it seems so long ago, but, and honestly, we'll have to see whether or not another sort of controversy like this emerges over the next few weeks. But you're right, this was sort of Christmas 2020 and people hadn't left their houses. There were travel advisories, there's very much cautions against leaving the country and things like that. And a whole pile of UCP MLAs and staff left the country. And it ended up being this like huge controversy for the Premier. And he was attacked sort of from all sides, people on the left, people on the right, people who'd been following the rules and felt like their leadership should be doing the same thing. So it was the first sort of big controversy of 2021 and took up quite a lot of attention. And as I said, I think we'll have to wait and see what happens this year, because just last week, a memo went out to the UCP caucus regarding travel, basically pointing out that there were no restrictions on it right now and things like that. So there are presumably a number of people who have travel plans, and we'll have to see what happens with those.
Now let's talk as well about Premier Jason Kenney saying we're open for summer, but then we're closed for fall as we got ready for the fourth wave here. Basically, everyone admitted overselling this was a bit of a mistake, even people within the party. And Tyler, I guess if you couple this with Kenney being on holidays and the perception that the government kind of went AWOL in August, then delays in introducing public health measures that led to a near collapse of the healthcare system, this didn't sit well with a lot of Albertans here.
If there was one thing that sort of most substantially damaged the Kenney government this year, I think that's probably it. The Premier won't say that the Open for Summer plan was a mistake. He actually does think that at the time the science justified it, that the experience of countries like Great Britain justified it. But what everyone else sort of in the party is saying that is they oversold it by saying that we're open for good, we're not going to have restrictions come in again, we're not going to have a vaccine passport. The certainty with which some of those statements were made really, I think, harmed the party coming into the fall. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Kenney himself was on vacation for a couple weeks in sort of early August and returned. And about the time that cases really started climbing, he was sort of working from Calgary for a week, and there hadn't been a briefing. And the health minister, who was Tyler Shandor at the time, hadn't actually been seen since late July. So there was this real perception that who was manning the controls, and it was very, very controversial. And it felt to many Albertans like the new restrictions that came in early September were just much too late. And then of course we were right into the fourth wave, which as you mentioned brought the healthcare system sort of within days of a collapse and having to introduce triage protocols to determine who would get care. So sort of a cascading series of events over about 3 or 4 months there that can sort of be linked back to the Open for Summer thing, and hugely controversial for Jason Kenney's government.
Now, something else from this past year was some of the infighting within the party itself, and the United Conservative Party weren't really as united at times. Some within caucus felt that maybe they didn't go far enough when it came to restrictions. Others said they went too far. Where do we stand now? And that was also a big topic of discussion this year, the infighting.
It really was, especially in the Canadian context generally, when there's so much party discipline. Some of the caucus infighting seemed, very, very dissonant this year. And Kenney, has been fairly open about it, saying, look, there's disagreement on these things within my caucus. And we hash it out and have respectful discussions and so on and so forth. However, some of this sort of spilled out publicly. There was a letter back in the spring that was signed by more than a dozen UCP MLAs saying that more restrictions was not the answer. 2 members of his caucus, Todd Lowen and Drew Barnes, were ejected over some of their agitating over COVID restrictions. And then, sort of in the fourth wave, there is this whole sort of idea that this palace intrigue that they were going to oust Jason Kenney in a caucus meeting with a vote of non-confidence in his leadership, and that never materialized. So at the end of the day, there was a lot of smoke, but no fire. But it has certainly been very much a part of the political story this year that in addition to fighting COVID-19, in addition to trying to get some of his agenda items passed, Jason Kenney's also spent all this time fighting with his own caucus about the government's agenda.
Now, it's also notable because this means there's going to be a leadership review in the spring. But Tyler, you and I have talked about that before. Who's really strong enough to take the reins if it's not Jason Kenney and take on Rachel Notley and the NDP? Now, there is word now that Brian Jean actually won the nomination for the UCP in Fort McMurray. Is that official yet?
I believe it is. And the question, of course, is whether or not he's going to win that by-election. And that seems, I think it's fair to say, almost a certainty. Which will cause all sorts of interesting drama within the UCP caucus once he takes his seat in the legislature. But you raise a great question about this leadership review comes along. Is Jason Kenney going to lose, of course, is the first question. And I think that's an open question, frankly. He has a lot of the support of people with sort of the ground game and the tactical acumen to survive a leadership review. The attempts at the UCP AGM from people who don't like him to cause problems for him, I mean, they really failed. So I think he has a good chance of surviving if he wants to. If he doesn't survive, then of course we get into the question of who's going to take over. And Brian Jean was sort of the first out the gate to say that yes, he wants to take over the party. Yes, he wants to be the Alberta Premier. Danielle Smith has sort of, carefully tossed her hat into the ring. And then, of course, whoever wins this, who knows? Maybe it could be Leela here. Maybe it could be Travis Taves. There's all sorts of names that sort of float around. And then the next question, of course, is who could defeat Rachel Notley in the 2023 election. And that is, in and of itself, a completely separate and equally important question for the party.
Yeah, Rachel Notley, as a result of what's happened within Jason Kenney's caucus here, apparently Kenney's leadership plummeted. Only 20% of Albertans at various times thought he was doing a good job. But Tyler, let's be honest, a lot of politicians face some pretty hard times. I mean, Doug Ford was very unpopular in Ontario. I mean, Horgan and BC, Moe as well in Saskatchewan. So a lot of provincial leaders took a hit during the pandemic here. But a new poll from Leger shows that the NDP leads the UCP if an election were to be held immediately.
That's right. The polling shows, a fairly commanding lead for Rachel Notley's New Democrats. And I don't really think that's surprising when you look at sort of the number of people who, in other polls, have said they really don't approve of Jason Kenney's governance. As you said, about 20% of people feel that he hasn't done a very good job. And then, even within those who voted for the UCP, only about 40% approve of Kenney's performance. So really, really bad polling numbers for Jason Kenney. I mean, there's no way around that. Even people close to Kenney are going to say that those numbers are dismal. Of course, it's just polling. The election's a long way out. A whole lot of things could change. But the point of this is to point out that over the last year, Rachel Notley has had sort of a good year by as a result of how bad Jason Kenney's year has been. She's been able to hammer him on COVID policy. She's been able to hammer him on some of his legislative steps that they've taken, and has really been, I think, quite an effective opposition leader, and is really harnessing a lot of the discontent that Albertans are feeling, and harnessing some of that. So she's certainly riding a bit of a wave right now. The question, of course, as with everything else, is whether or not that's going to be sustained over the next several months, the next year and a half.
And the NDP also out-fundraised the UCP this past year as well. So even some of the grassroots Albertans may be, their perception of the NDP may be shifting somewhat. So, but like you said before, the next provincial election's not till 2023. So this will give Jason Kenney and the UCP a chance to rebuild its party's image, the next year or so. Now, Tyler, the education curriculum was also another major political football in 2021. In fact, this week, the province announced it was going to make some revisions and delay implementation. Let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so this has just been a huge controversy for them. The rewrite of the social studies curriculum was controversial right off the bat. Then once they sort of announced it, school boards were really reluctant to actually sort of take it up and introduce it for this sort of test phase. There were protests from teachers, there were protests from parents, and the government really stuck to its guns for a long, long time until sort of this week when they're going back and they've said they're going to relook at some of the controversial things. They've moved some items out of the curriculum. For example, there's some stuff about financial literacy that was in this social studies curriculum. And they said, well, no, that can probably be in like a health and wellness class. Sort of in response to concerns that there was just too much content in it. So, notable because they backed off on this a little bit. Notable, they're admitting a mistake a little bit. The other thing I think that's worth noting about this to some extent is it might also take some of the wind out of their opponent's sails. So I think there's a political tactical move there as well, to sort of say, we changed a little bit, now you can't attack us quite so effectively. So a couple things I think happening with that decision.
Now, it's also worth noting that the UCP did some solid governing this year. They've continued to move on legislative items with a lot more vigor than some other provincial governments. And one example, Tyler, the discussions of an Alberta provincial police force.
It feels like a lifetime ago that the Fair Deal panel was meeting. They released the report, I think, in June 2020, which was like shortly after the first wave or second wave had peaked, I guess, and feels very, very strange in retrospect to think about it. But that's right. They did this whole study on the Alberta Provincial Police Force, ran the numbers a little bit, saying that it would be, maybe a little bit more expensive than the RCMP, but you might get better service in rural areas, more culturally appropriate service, better response times, things like that. But it's just a really good example of how the UCP has done actually quite a bit in the midst of the pandemic. There was some election rules overhauls recently. They've just legislated a lot throughout the pandemic, which, as you mentioned, is really notable compared to other provinces. But the one that sort of sticks out in my memory is the Alberta Provincial Police Force, because it's a big deal. It's a fair deal promise, and also it just has like absolutely nothing to do with the pandemic. So it just sort of shows that the wheels of government, are sort of turning behind the scenes, even if they're not, they're not making headlines every single day.
Now, on the municipal election ballot was the equalization referendum question. This is probably a big win for Jason Kenney because 63% of Albertans said, it's time for reform. So that, in fact, was a big win for the Kenney government.
And they really needed a win about that time. This was held sort of as the fourth wave was tapering off, about the time that poll I mentioned where he was at like 20% popularity came out. And this equalization referendum could have really been, a referendum on Jason Kenney's leadership himself. But as it turned out, Albertans voted the way that pretty much everyone expected them to. This was a fair deal panel recommendation as well, I should note, that this be held in conjunction with the municipal election. And the question, of course, as we've talked about before, is now that 63% of Albertans voted in favor of removing the principle of equalization from the Constitution. The question, of course, is what happens now? Are there going to be negotiations? What can the Kenney government do to make this sort of happen? Is this a political tool that can be used in some other fashion? All that's a little bit unclear, frankly, but certainly a very big part of politics in Alberta in 2021.
Tyler, the Ariela Kimmel lawsuit was also another major political story. It led to some within Kenney's caucus calling for his resignation. Tell me more about that.
Yes, so Leela here had called for his resignation over this lawsuit. It's a little bit of a complicated lawsuit, but the Coles Notes version is Ariela Kimmel was a former staffer for Doug Schweitzer, and she was dismissed. And so she claimed in a lawsuit that she was dismissed because she had reported sexual harassment and sort of a toxic work culture. The government, of course, responded in legal documents saying that wasn't the case. She was let go in line with her contract, and sort of disputes that these allegations of harassment and a poor work culture went unaddressed. They said they were addressed. This just sort of, it blew up a little bit at the legislature with, the NDP really hammering the Kenney government over this. As you mentioned, some within caucus upset about it. So just a very dramatic few days on this lawsuit. And I think, that's probably something we'll hear a little bit about intermittently moving forward, because of course a lawsuit does not end in a few months or even or anything like that. So it's going to be on the radar for sure.
Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for the great work this year.
Merry Christmas, Hal.
Well, as we grow older and retirement age begins to approach, most of us turn our thoughts to how much money will I need to live out the rest of my life. But are there far more important issues to consider when it comes to retirement? Well, joining us today is Alex Lippert, one of the co-founders of Steadfast Wealth, a company which has assets under advisement of nearly $1 billion. He is also the co-author of the book After Work, an honest discussion about the retirement lie and how to live a future worthy of dreams. He's joining us from Colorado Springs. Welcome to Bridge City News, Alex. So great to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, what an interesting title for a book. Can you maybe tell, first of all, you don't look anywhere close to retirement age yourself, but so how did you come to write this book? You're obviously a financial planner. You work with people close to retirement, right?
Yeah, so being a financial planner now for almost 11 years, it's really led to so many just direct observations and a lot of insights into folks' kind of psychological side as they approach and, get into retirement, and kind of what happens beyond the financial side. The financial piece of the equation is really important. Obviously, that's my career. But time after time, there were so many folks who, they have all of the financial side covered completely. They don't have any problems, living out their lives, doing whatever they want to do from a financial standpoint. But a lot of them end up unhappy and find themselves lost in retirement. And that's a curiosity that I wanted to explore with the book. And so that's kind of the genesis of the book.
Sounds like it. So in the book, you mentioned the retirement lie. So can you tell us what the retirement lie is? What does our cultural mindset get wrong about retirement?
Yeah, the retirement lie is that a withdrawn, kind of self-centered one is a good one. So there's this narrative that permeates our society that says, hey, you've put in time, you've put in effort, you've raised children, you've poured into other people's lives, you've poured into the company that you've worked for, your entire career. Now it's time for you. Now it's time to sail off into the sunset and vacation and play golf and all these different things that are fun that I think do have a place in your life. But I think, that cannot be the entree. That can only be the garnish. The fun stuff can be the garnish, but you really need to focus on purpose and fulfillment and, finding work after work, even if it's not quote unquote work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you mentioned right off the top, it's psychological too. Now, you regularly advise people about financial planning for retirement. Obviously, that's what you do. And you've heard of a lot of personal stories, I'm sure, as you've come to know your clients over the years. But once people retire and have a lot of free time on their hands, do they often lose their sense of purpose, perhaps part of their identity?
Yes, they absolutely do. And I think it takes a lot of intentional thought before stepping away from work or before becoming an empty nester. You know, some of these milestone moments where you've been busy, busy, busy. And even if you haven't necessarily been fulfilled, you're almost tricked into thinking you're fulfilled just because there's so much on your plate at any one given time. But as soon as you step out of that kind of life madness, if you will, and into that time where you do have all of this extra time, if you're not intentional about, you know, where am I going and what's my next purpose center, you know, like where am I going to feel that, like I did a lot of good work today, regardless of what that work is, where is that going to come from?
Yeah, there comes that sense of purpose and meaning, and back to the lie. So how do people get out of that lie, so to speak?
Yeah, well, the first step, I think, is just to examine the word retire and retirement. I mean, you come up with a lot of interesting synonyms, you know, retreat, withdraw. I mean, all of these words that sound terrible, right? So don't think about retirement as retirement. Think about retirement as a graduation. You know, I mean, when we have a college student graduating, think about how many horizons are open to them. Like, you know, like the world is waiting for them to go get it. And I think you need to think through that same lens. I mean, this is a graduation from one season, which could have been a fantastic career, raising children, all of these great things. But this next season of your life can be the most impactful of your life because you have the most financial resources, presumably. You absolutely have the most time of your life, and you have the most experience and wisdom. And so all of these things culminate into this like beautiful combination of you have so much potential. So go out and live it, and your life is going to be transformed, but you're also going to transform the community, your family members, everybody around you at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned synonyms earlier, because when I was researching for this interview, I actually did a synonym search on the word retirement, and you're right. Words like loneliness and isolation came up. Like there were some really negative things that I would never have even thought of. And I'm like, that's not what retirement means to me. But I think you're right. I think people do find themselves in that. So what is the key to to pursue that purposeful retirement? What's the key to that?
Yeah, so in the book After Work, we walk through 10 different keys, and they're all very different. You know, so awe, having a sense of awe is one. You know, purpose is obviously kind of the gravity that everything revolves around. But I think sometimes it's helpful to have a deathbed conversation with yourself now. So fast forward your life, think that you've lived, you know, this long, happy life, quote unquote, happy, right? And you look back and, you know, what would you regret spending more time doing? And what would you regret really hoping that you had spent more time doing? So would you look back and say, man, I wish I would have spent, you know, time playing more pickleball or having more happy hour with friends? Or would you say, I wish I would have spent more time with my grandchildren, teaching them how to fish, or, you know, painting, you know, with my children, or, I mean, whatever it is, you know, or starting a nonprofit and volunteering more and making an impact in somebody else's life. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do in this approach. And I think, you know, that it's very unique to any one given person. So it's hard to say, hey, here's the roadmap, do X, Y, Z, and you'll feel fulfilled and you'll feel like you're full of purpose, right? But I think if you have that kind of that deathbed conversation with yourself, that really brings into context, you know, what is a fun thing that's fun, but it's not lasting, it's not meaningful in your life, and what is truly meaningful, and then home in on those meaningful aspects of your life and just go get them and just get re-engaged in those however you can.
Mm-hmm. That actually sounds like great advice for anybody to have that conversation, so that you can have more of a purpose-driven life, so to speak. Wonderful. There's a lot of wisdom in that, I think. Now, you write about time and structure, of course. So retired people suddenly have more time on their hands, but might be lacking that structure of routine that they once had when they were working, right? So how can they plan and manage their calendar properly?
Yeah, so calendar is an interesting chapter in the book. It's probably the shortest chapter. It's fairly straightforward, but I think a calendar is an interesting tool to use, and not just to fill it with busy stuff, right? Because that defeats the purpose. But I think having a calendar helps you achieve minor goals in any one given day towards some greater goal or undertaking. And so I think not having a calendar and waking up and just winging it in retirement, saying, hey, it's Wednesday, I slept in, I'm enjoying my coffee, and the next month my entire calendar is just blank. Like that leads to a lot of indecisiveness and inaction, I think. And so I think as you begin to look at retirement, and even just now, as you start to build a calendar, really try to just implement these fulfilling aspects of life. Like we've got a client who seems like he's always fulfilled. He's a fantastic guy, and he writes, hey, I've got this goal of reading a book every 2 weeks, and I'm reading about all of the presidents, and I'm like doing all of these different interesting things that he's generally interested in. And so he actually carves out 2 hours in the morning to read. And so it doesn't have to be this huge goal, start a company and do XYZ and do all of these massive things. It can just be really, really small things. But I think, any audacious kind of big life goal and thing that's going to be really fulfilling is going to be challenging, and it's going to take time and effort. And it's always a culmination of really, really small actions from now until, you've reached your objective. And so I think utilizing the calendar in that way to basically goal set on a really small scale can help you ultimately reach where you want to go.
I would imagine there's sometimes mental health issues can set in retirement. People might find themselves a bit depressed. Do you find that sometimes?
Yeah, the statistics are shocking, actually. I mean, when you look at some of the stats about just retirees, like the divorce rate has tripled for age 65 plus since 1990. This large insurance study done by Cigna found that loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And a lot of retirees are very lonely because, for one reason or the other, but I think ultimately connection to others is part of our human fabric. And I think that you really need to lean in, however that looks in your own life, and really lean in and stay connected. And there's another study that we mentioned in the book that's about, purposeful connections with others. And it's not about how many connections you have. It's not about being this social butterfly out there with a lot of superficial, relationships, a lot of acquaintances. It's about the depth of your relationships. And so even if there's one person in your life that you have a deep relationship with, how can you make that deeper?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what advice do you have for viewers to avoid that loneliness gap? I mean, you talk a bit about the importance of connecting with others through serving, of course.
Yeah, I think, generosity is one chapter in the book where we dig into not only financial generosity, but also, donating your time towards a worthy cause. But I think, there's a lot of noise in our lives. And I think the first step really is to try to turn the volume down on all of that noise. I mean, we all have a smartphone in our pocket with, instant news, instant everything about the markets, about your finances, about, this or that. And I think you really need to tone down a lot of the distractions, a lot of the things that we feel like we can control, but we have no control over. And so I think the control, notion in retirement is really interesting, because if you start to take away the things that take up a lot of your mind space that you're trying to control, but you simply can't, then you have a lot more energy to spend on the things that are really important in your life that you can control. Like you can control your health to a certain degree. Like you can choose to live a healthy lifestyle. You can control how much time you dedicate to your friends and family. You can't control what happens in the investment markets, or with, taxes or what have you. And so I think focusing on the right things and just trying to turn down the volume on the things that you can't control helps a lot in that regard.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned health and how you can control that, because your book includes a chapter on some very important, practical, but important things. And you're mentioning that movement and exercise, of course, is one of them. So tell us a bit about why this is pretty important. I mean, we all know it's important to exercise, but I think it's probably good for the mind too.
Yeah, it is. And we chose not to title the chapter Exercise because that comes with a certain connotation, right? So we chose movement. And I think the basis there is that, for a healthy body and mind, we just need to be active. I mean, I know some folks who are 90 years old who are out there, walking multiple miles a day, and they've got, bad knees, what have you, but they're out there doing it. And when you have a conversation with them, you're like, wow, I feel like I'm just talking with a peer of mine, not somebody who's lived, more than double my lifetime. But then I also meet folks who are, say, 60, who kind of come off as that classic grandma or grandpa type, who are, unhealthy, having just trouble doing normal everyday things. And I'm like, well, what is the delta there? What's the difference between those two? And I think a big part of it is just movement, having an active lifestyle, going out and doing what you can do. And I think it's really important to remember that it's not about anybody else, with this. I mean, it's not about comparing yourself to the Joneses or anything. It's really just about improving you, right? So being the best you can be. So it's not about comparing yourself to anybody else. It's about, hey, if I walked a mile yesterday and I felt okay, how about a mile and 5 steps more? And then eventually you're going to reach this point where, the stairs aren't a problem anymore and you can carry your own luggage or what have you. I mean, I think it's all about improving when you can and where you can as much as possible.
Absolutely. Sounds like your book has all kinds of nuggets of wisdom for sure. Thanks so much for being with us today, Alex. Alex Lippert is the co-author of the book After Work, available at theafterwork.net.
Thanks so much.
I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.